I used to think silence was the cruelest punishment. Then I discovered something worse, the sound of water running in a place where love once bloomed. Grant Holloway pressed his forehead against the cold window glass, watching a figure move through his gardens in the early morning mist. For 14 months he'd avoided this view, but today something had drawn him here, a sound that shouldn't exist. Water flowing where it had been forbidden to flow. The young woman below moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Lily Bennett, the shy girl from Oregon, who'd been working his grounds for 6 months, had somehow found her way into the one place he'd sworn would remain untouched forever. Some gardens hold secrets that time refuses to heal. In the exclusive Hawthorne estates where manicured lawns stretch like emerald carpets and marble fountains dance with morning light, there lived a silence that money couldn't buy away. But today, that silence was about to be broken by the most unlikely of voices. Lily had noticed what no one else dared to see, or perhaps what no one else cared enough to hear. The soft, persistent whisper of water where it shouldn't be, the kind of leak that speaks of neglect, of systems failing, when no one has the heart to listen. She was 23 years old, with dirt-stained fingers and eyes that caught details others missed. Back home in Oregon, her grandfather had been the master gardener for the city's botanical conservatory, and he'd taught her that every irrigation system had its own voice, a language of pressure and flow that spoke to those who knew how to listen. Her grandmother used to say she had garden ears, the ability to hear what plants needed before they even began to wilt. But it was more than that. Lily could detect the subtle difference between a properly functioning sprinkler and one that was slowly failing, could hear the whisper of a loose connection or the strain of a pump working too hard. It was a gift that had brought her here, seeking nothing more than honest work, tending to something beautiful. What she found was a world where wealth built walls not just around properties, but around hearts. The other staff members called her the shy girl who talks to roses, not knowing that those roses had been teaching her the layout of an estate where grief had taken root deeper than any flower. The East Garden had been locked away for over a year. Chain-link fencing, do not enter signs, and whispered warnings from Victoria Wells painted it as forbidden territory. But gardens like grief have their own language. And this particular morning, as dawn painted the sky in shades of hope, the shy girl who everyone underestimated was about to discover why some places are left to die. She approached the locked gate with the quiet determination of someone who had spent her life being overlooked. The fence wasn't actually locked, just latched with a mechanism that relied on suggestion rather than force. Her fingers found the latch, and the gate swung open with a soft creak that seemed to echo through years of accumulated silence. What she found took her breath away. The East Garden was a masterpiece of landscape design, even in its neglected state. Curved pathways wound between raised beds where roses still bloomed despite months of abandonment. A central fountain stood dry and silent, its carved angels reaching toward heaven with empty hands. And there in the far corner, water sprayed in wild arcs from a broken sprinkler head, slowly eroding the carefully laid stonework beneath a mechanical heartbeat, in a place where time had stopped. Sometimes the most important work begins when we stop asking for permission. Someone loved this place, Lily whispered to herself, kneeling beside the damaged sprinkler. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each plant positioned with mathematical precision, yet flowing naturally like a river finding its course. This wasn't just landscaping. It was art created by someone who understood that beauty requires both vision and patience. As she worked unscrewing the broken head and examining the water pressure, Lily noticed something carved into the stone base of the fountain. Letters small and precise, etched with the careful hand of someone who wanted to leave a permanent mark, Marielle. She wrote the name in her small notebook, the one she carried to track maintenance schedules and seasonal plantings. Something about it felt important, though she couldn't say why. The shy girl who had spent her whole life cataloging the needs of growing things had just stumbled upon a mystery that went deeper than soil and roots. From his third-floor window, Grant watched her work with a mixture of fascination and dread. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, drawn by a sound he thought he'd never hear again, the soft patter of water on leaves in the east garden. His wife had designed that irrigation system herself, spending weeks calculating angles and pressure points to create what she called nature's own symphony. Every morning for the past 14 months, he'd forced himself to walk past that window without looking, because seeing the garden's slow deterioration was a torment he couldn't bear. But neither could he bring himself to have it properly maintained, or God forbid, destroyed. It existed in a limbo that matched his own, too painful to tend, too precious to abandon. The broken sprinkler had been calling to him for weeks, its erratic spray pattern visible from his bedroom window, but he'd ordered Victoria to ignore it. He'd ordered everyone to ignore it, because acknowledging the garden's needs would mean acknowledging that life was supposed to continue even after loss. The day she'd finished installing it 3 months before the accident, she'd stood in that same spot where the shy girl now knelt laughing as the first drops of water found their mark. Marielle had always been drawn to quiet people claiming they understood the language of growing things better than those who filled the world with noise. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victoria Wells's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. The head groundskeeper stood in the gateway, her face flushed with anger and something else, fear. She'd spent the past 6 months trying to keep the new hire in line, but this shy girl had a way of finding trouble in the most unexpected places. What Lily didn't know was that Victoria had been personally instructed by Grant himself never to allow anyone near the East Garden. The order had come just days after Marielle's funeral, delivered in a voice so broken that Victoria had never dared to question it. "No one goes in there," he'd said. "No one touches anything. If I find out someone has been in that garden, they're gone immediately." Victoria had watched other staff members lose their jobs for lesser infractions, and she wasn't about to let some idealistic young woman from Oregon put her own position at risk. "The leak was damaging the tiles," Lily said, gesturing toward the widening pool of water. "I was just trying to—" "You were just trespassing in a restricted area," Victoria snapped. "This garden is off limits, period. I don't care if you're some kind of water whisperer or whatever the other staff are calling you. But someone needs to let it rot." Victoria's voice carried a bitterness that surprised them both. "Some things are left broken for a reason, Bennett. And a shy girl from Oregon isn't authorized to fix them." The words stung more than Lily expected. She'd been called a shy girl her whole life, usually with the implication that quiet people had nothing important to contribute. But as she looked at the broken sprinkler and the thirsty plants around it, she felt something her grandmother had taught her. Sometimes the most important work happens when no one is watching. As Victoria stalked away, Lily found herself alone with the broken sprinkler and a growing sense that she'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple repair job. But her hands were already moving, muscle memory guiding her as she fitted the new head, tested the pressure, adjusted the spray pattern. When she turned the water back on, the sprinkler came to life with a gentle whisper, sending arcs of crystal droplets across the thirsty plants. For the first time in over a year, the East Garden was drinking again. That evening, as Lily packed her tools and prepared to leave, she didn't notice the figure watching from the third-floor window. Thomas Grady found Grant there an hour later, still staring at the place where water now flowed in perfect arcs across his wife's final design. She would have liked that girl, Thomas said softly. The elderly butler had served the Holloway family for 30 years, and he was the only person Grant still spoke to with anything approaching warmth. The way she noticed the leak, I mean. Mrs. Holloway always said the garden would tell you what it needed if you knew how to listen. Grant's hand pressed against the window glass. Fingers spread wide as if reaching toward something he could never touch again. She was always drawn to the quiet ones. He said, his voice barely above a whisper. Said they heard things the rest of us missed. This shy girl certainly heard something, Thomas observed. Question is, what are you going to do about it? But Grant had already turned away from the window, the weight of 14 months of grief settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar coat. He'd learned that some questions were too dangerous to answer, especially when they involved the possibility of feeling something other than the numbness that had become his closest companion. The next morning brought consequences that would ripple through the estate like stones thrown into still water. Victoria had reported the incident to the estate management, and word spread quickly through the staff quarters the shy girl had finally gone too far. But Thomas Grady had different plans. He found Lily in the employee break room, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and the look of someone expecting the worst. The old butler had watched enough promising young people get crushed by the estate's politics, and something about this particular shy girl reminded him of someone he'd once known, someone who had brought light to these grounds before tragedy stole it away. "You're not in trouble, child," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "But you've stepped into something bigger than a broken sprinkler, and you need to understand what that means." Lily looked up, her eyes wide with apprehension. "I know I shouldn't have gone in there, but the damage was getting worse every day. Someone had to stop." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "You did exactly what needed to be done, but there's something you need to know about that garden and about the man who owns it." The story Thomas told would change everything Lily thought she knew about the estate and the man who owned it. He spoke in careful, measured tones about Grant Holloway's transformation, from a man who threw garden parties for the entire neighborhood to someone who locked himself away like a ghost in his own home. "That name you saw carved in the stone, Marielle, she was Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Grant's wife." Thomas's weathered hands folded in his lap as he continued. "Died in a car accident 14 months ago. She was coming home from the garden center, arms full of lily bulbs she wanted to plant for their anniversary." Lily's heart began to race. "She never made it home." She whispered, the pieces falling into place. "That garden was her final project," Thomas continued. "She spent the last year of her life designing every detail, installing every sprinkler head with her own hands. Said she wanted to create a place where love could grow for generations." He looked toward the window where the East Garden's trees swayed in the morning breeze. "She was particularly drawn to shy people, you know. Always said they understood the language of growing things better than the rest of us." The revelation hit Lily like a physical blow. "And Mr. Holloway hasn't been the same since. Won't go near the garden, won't let anyone tend it. Says some things should stay exactly as she left them." Thomas's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He hasn't smiled once since the funeral, hasn't laughed, barely speaks except to conduct business." "But it's dying," Lily said, thinking of the neglected plants and the broken irrigation system. "So is he," Thomas replied. "And that's why what you did yesterday matters more than you know. You see, Mrs. Holloway used to say that gardens choose their caretakers, that some people are called to tend what others would abandon. She believed that shy people like you, people who listen more than they speak, They're the ones who hear what the earth is really saying. Lily spent the rest of the day in a daze going through the motions of her regular duties, while her mind wrestled with what she'd learned. The other staff members continued to refer to her as the shy girl who fixed the forbidden garden. But now she understood that her action had been about more than just preventing water damage. That evening, as the sun set over the estate, she found herself standing at the East Garden gate again, this time with a different purpose. The weight of what she'd discovered, the depth of Grant's grief, the significance of Marielle's final project, made her feel both smaller and more important than she ever had before. She pulled out a small piece of paper and wrote carefully, "I'm sorry I touched the sprinkler, but I thought she'd want it to flow again." The shy girl who heard the garden calling. She folded the note and placed it on the stone bench near the fountain, weighing it down with a small pebble. Then she walked away, not knowing that Grant Holloway was watching from his study window, seeing her silhouette against the dying light. Grant found the note an hour later, drawn to the garden by an impulse he couldn't name. As he read the words, something shifted in his chest, a crack in the wall of grief he'd built around his heart. The phrase, "shy girl who heard the garden calling," echoed something Marielle used to say about people who were drawn to tend growing things. She'd believed that the earth spoke to certain souls, usually the quiet ones who listened more than they spoke. "Watch for the shy ones," she'd told him once while they worked together, installing the very sprinkler system that now hummed around him. They're the ones who hear what the garden really needs. Standing there in the moonlight, surrounded by the evidence of one shy girl's courage to act when others would have walked away, Grant felt something he hadn't experienced in 14 months, a flutter of curiosity about another human being. Who was this young woman who saw broken things and couldn't help but fix them? This stranger who had somehow understood, without being told, that his wife's garden was meant to be alive. For the first time in 14 months, Grant knelt in the East Garden, his expensive suit forgotten, as he touched the stone where his wife's name was carved. The sprinkler system hummed quietly around him, creating the symphony of water and leaves that Marielle had dreamed of. And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of one shy girl's courage to act when others would have walked away, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to hope. The next morning brought a surprise that would change everything. Lily was trimming roses near the main house when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. She looked up to see Grant Holloway walking toward her the first time she'd seen the estate's owner up close. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the weight of infinite sadness. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to contain his emotions behind walls of perfect control. He stopped 3 feet away from her, hands clasped behind his back, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The morning air was thick with the scent of roses and possibility. "You're the shy girl who fixed my wife's garden," he said finally, his voice rough with disuse. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't bear to watch it suffer." "What's your name?" he asked, ignoring her apology. "Lily. Lily Bennett, sir." The change in his expression was immediate and profound. Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise recognition, and something else that might have been hope. His mouth opened slightly, and for the first time in 14 months, the corners of his lips turned upward. "Lily," he repeated softly. That was her favorite flower. She always said that shy people like you understood what flowers needed better than anyone else. And then, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, Grant Holloway smiled. The smile lasted only a few seconds, but its impact rippled through the estate like stones thrown into still water. By noon, every staff member had heard the news. Mr. Holloway smiled. actually smiled at the shy girl from Oregon. The story spread through the servants' quarters with the speed of wildfire. Maria, the head housekeeper, crossed herself and whispered, "Milagro." The groundskeeping crew stopped their work to stare at the east garden, as if expecting to see some visible sign of transformation. Even the security guards radioed each other with updates about their employer's unprecedented display of human emotion. For 14 months, they'd all walked on eggshells around a man who seemed to have forgotten how to feel anything but pain. They'd watched him become a ghost in his own home, speaking only when necessary, moving through his days like someone going through the motions of life without actually living. But now something had shifted in the very atmosphere of the estate. Victoria Wells was not pleased. She cornered Lily in the equipment, shed her face twisted with jealousy and confusion. "What did you do? What did you say to him?" "Nothing special," Lily replied truthfully. "I just told him my name." "Your name." Victoria's laugh was bitter. 23 years old, and you think you can fix a broken man just by being another shy girl with a green thumb. But Thomas Grady, who had witnessed the encounter from the kitchen window, understood something deeper. "Some smiles aren't because of people," he told Victoria later. "They're because someone finally fixed what mattered. And sometimes it takes a shy girl to see what the rest of us missed." Over the following days, subtle changes began to appear throughout the estate. Grant started taking morning walks again, though he never ventured near the east garden. He spoke to Thomas more frequently, asking about household matters he'd ignored for months. He even inquired about the other staff members, learning names he'd never bothered to remember, especially asking about the shy girl who understood gardens. But most remarkably, he began to watch Lily work. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with the quiet attention of someone studying a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She moved through the gardens with an intuitive grace that reminded him of Marielle's connection to growing things. Both women seemed to hear what plants needed before they wilted, to sense the subtle rhythms of seasons and soil. One afternoon, while Lily was deadheading roses near the main house, Grant approached her again. This time he carried a manila envelope in his hands, and his expression held a mixture of nervousness and determination. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice stronger than before. "But first I need to ask you a question. When you fixed that sprinkler, did you know whose garden it was?" "Not at first," Lily replied honestly. "I just knew it was beautiful, and that it needed help." Grant nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "My wife used to say that gardens choose their caretakers, that some people, especially shy people who listen more than they speak, are called to tend what others would abandon." He held out the envelope. "She spent months designing that irrigation system. Would you like to see how it was supposed to work?" Inside the envelope were dozens of detailed drawings, botanical sketches, water pressure calculations, and a master plan that showed the East Garden in its intended glory. Marielle's handwriting filled the margins with notes about seasonal plantings, optimal spray patterns, and something that made Lily's breath catch: a detailed plan for a lily pond, complete with specifications for water circulation and seasonal blooming cycles. "She was planning to surprise me," Grant said quietly. "Our anniversary is next month. She wanted to plant lilies around the pond, then reveal it when they bloomed." His voice broke slightly. "She never got the chance." "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, tracing the elegant lines of Marielle's design. "She had incredible vision." "She did." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "The thing is, I've been thinking about what you wrote in your note, about her wanting the water to flow again. And I realized something: Marielle wouldn't want her garden to die, because I'm too afraid to let it live." As they stood there together, surrounded by the roses that Lily tended with such care, Grant began to speak about his wife for the first time since her death. Not about the accident, but about the woman who had filled his days with laughter and his gardens with impossible beauty. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "The way you noticed the leak, the way you couldn't just walk away from something that needed fixing. She always said the world was divided into two types of people, those who notice suffering and those who cause it. And she believed that shy people like you, people who observe before they act, they're the ones who see what really matters." "I just couldn't bear to watch something beautiful die," Lily said softly. "Neither could she," Grant replied. "And that's why I want to ask you something. Something that might sound crazy, but I think she would have wanted it this way." The conversation that followed would change both their lives forever. Grant spoke about his plan to restore the East Garden exactly as Marielle had envisioned it, complete with the lily pond that had been her final dream. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone who understood not just the technical aspects of gardening, but the emotional weight of tending something that had been created with love. "I need someone who can hear what the garden is saying," he explained. "Someone who won't just follow the plans, but will understand the heart behind them. Someone like the shy girl who heard a broken sprinkler when no one else was listening." A week later, Lily found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery, along with a small silver key, for the shy girl who heard the garden before anyone else did. "By executive order, you are hereby appointed as the sole caretaker of the East Garden Memorial. You have full authority to restore it according to Marielle's original design. With one addition, the lily pond must be completed by the anniversary date. Whatever you need, ask Thomas. Whatever it costs, don't worry about it. The garden chose you just as Marielle said it would. Thank you for helping me remember that some things are worth preserving even when they're too painful to face." Grant Holloway. The transformation of the East Garden became the talk of the estate. Lily worked from dawn to dusk, following Marielle's intricate plans, while adding her own touches where appropriate. She installed the lily pond exactly as designed, surrounded it with the varieties specified in Marielle's notes, and even found a way to incorporate a small waterfall that would provide the sound of flowing water throughout the garden. Grant visited frequently during the restoration, always accompanied by Thomas, never staying long, but watching with growing peace as his wife's vision came to life. He and Lily developed an easy working relationship, built on shared respect for Marielle's memory, and a mutual understanding that some conversations are best held in the presence of growing things. "You know," Grant said one afternoon, watching Lily adjust the water flow in the lily pond, "Marielle used to say that shy people made the best gardeners because they listened to what the plants needed instead of imposing their own ideas." "She sounds like she was very wise," Lily replied, not looking up from her work. "She was. And she had a gift for seeing potential in people that others overlooked." He paused, watching the water create gentle ripples across the pond's surface. "I think she would have seen something special in you from the very beginning." The weeks leading up to the anniversary brought a different kind of healing. The estate's staff began to notice changes not just in the garden, but in their employer. The man who had been a ghost in his own home was gradually returning to life, drawn by daily conversations with the shy girl who had become the keeper of his wife's final dream. Their interactions were gentle, respectful, two people learning to trust each other across a chasm of grief and hope. Grant would arrive each morning with coffee for both of them, and they would walk through the garden together, discussing Marielle's plans and Lily's progress. Sometimes they worked in comfortable silence, Grant holding tools while Lily adjusted water pressure or transplanted seedlings. Other times he would share stories about his wife, her laugh, her passion for sustainable gardening, her belief that every plant had a purpose beyond decoration. Lily in turn would share her own insights about soil conditions and seasonal timing, always careful to honor the original design while adding her own quiet expertise. The shy girl who had once been invisible to the estate's owner had become his most trusted confidant in matters of growth and renewal. "I never thought I'd say this," Victoria admitted to Thomas one evening. "But maybe that shy girl was exactly what this place needed. She's not just fixing the garden, she's fixing him." Thomas smiled, watching through the window, as Grant and Lily worked side by side, transplanting lily bulbs around the pond's perimeter. "Some healing happens through grand gestures," he said, "but the deepest healing happens when someone cares enough to notice what's broken and gentle enough to fix it properly." The garden's official reopening was scheduled for the anniversary of Marielle's death, not as a day of mourning, but as a celebration of her life and vision. Grant had invited a small group of close friends and family members, the same people who had attended her funeral 14 months earlier. On the morning of the ceremony, Lily arrived to find Grant already there, standing beside the lily pond, in his best suit, holding a single white lily. His face was calm, sad, but no longer devastated, like a man who had made peace with his ghosts. "She would have loved this," he said, gesturing toward the blooming lilies that surrounded the pond like stars reflected in still water. "Every detail is exactly as she imagined it." "Not exactly," Lily replied with a small smile. "I added something she didn't plan for." She led him to a corner of the garden where a small wooden bench sat beneath a flowering cherry tree. On the bench was a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Marielle Holloway, who believed that gardens choose their caretakers, and in gratitude to all who tend what others would abandon." Grant read the inscription twice, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You know," he said softly, "Marielle always said that the best memorials weren't monuments to the dead, but invitations for the living to continue growing." As the ceremony began, Lily found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching as Grant spoke about his wife with warmth instead of just sorrow. For the first time in 14 months, laughter could be heard in the East Garden, not because anyone had forgotten the sadness, but because someone had been brave enough to let beauty bloom again. The gathered friends and family members, many of whom had watched Grant retreat into himself after Marielle's death, were witnessing something extraordinary, a man learning to honor his wife's memory by living again rather than merely surviving. Children ran between the lily beds, their delighted squeals mixing with the gentle sound of water flowing through the restored irrigation system. Elderly relatives sat on the benches that Lily had carefully positioned throughout the garden, their faces soft with memories and wonder. And in the center of it all, Grant moved with a grace that his guests hadn't seen since before the accident, introducing Lily to everyone as the shy girl who brought Marielle's garden back to life. "You did this," Thomas said, appearing beside her. "That shy girl who just wanted to fix a broken sprinkler, you gave him back his life." "I just listened," Lily replied. "The garden told me what it needed." "And sometimes," Thomas smiled, "that's exactly what a broken heart needs too, someone who knows how to listen to what's really calling for help." As the sun set over the estate, casting golden light across the restored garden, Grant approached Lily one final time. For the third time since his wife's death, he smiled, this time with genuine warmth that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Thank you," he whispered, "for hearing what no one else could hear, for being brave enough to act when others would have walked away, for reminding me that some things are worth preserving even when they're too painful to face." And in that moment, surrounded by the sound of water flowing through a garden that had been saved by the courage of one shy girl who refused to let beauty die, both of them understood that sometimes the most powerful healing happens not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of caring enough to notice what's broken and gentle enough to fix it properly. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Millions of people are walking through their own gardens of grief, waiting for someone to notice what needs tending. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply pay attention to the broken sprinklers, the forgotten corners, the shy people who see what others miss. Like and subscribe if you believe in the healing power of gentle hands and caring hearts. Because love, like gardens, grows best when it's shared.